Welcome, everybody, to the first official episode of Terminally Online Gamers. I'm your host, Night Sky Prince, aka Night Sky, aka Ryan. I'm joined by my co host, Schrodinger's BabySeal. And this is essentially going to be right now, we have like a bi weekly structure for how we're going to be rolling these out. We're going to be talking about various different topics within the game industry. You guys know that we're big Final Fantasy heads, and that's going to make its way into this podcast for sure. And today we're going to be focused a lot on Clair Obscur Expedition 33. However, we are also joined by our guests, very special guests. So I want to go around and have everyone introduce themselves, Baby Seal included. Let's go ahead and start with my man Gene here. I've been wanting to have you on, collaborate with you in some capacity for a really long time now. So can you tell everyone who's maybe not familiar with you what you do and just generally what you've been working on?
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me on. I did not know this is an inaugural episode for this product, so very happy to be part of this. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, my name is Gene Park. I am the games critic for the Washington Post. I have been doing this since late 2019, so not too long. A lot of people think that I've been around for a long, long time. I've been alive for a long, long time, but I've only started covering games for the last 4 or 5 years, and I'm really happy to make everyone's acquaintance here. Night Sky and Baby Seal. I've gotten acquainted with these fellas through the Final Fantasy launches. You know, it's been a big recent few years for Final Fantasy. I think probably met around the remake era, and the remake was also when I really started to kind of start covering things. Remake launched at the advent of COVID, and that was kind of like when I got started too. So, and that all lasted all the way through 16, through today with Expedition 33. So good times. Glad to be here.
I'm Schrodinger's Baby Seal. I make content, and I mostly focused on Final Fantasy, but I've been involved in the industry like at various different levels for a long, long time. A lot of people think I'm an industry plant. I wouldn't describe myself that way. However, I do know a lot of weird stuff about a bunch of weird stuff, and have a sort of a philosophy and religion slant in my scholastic background, and so some of that will come out in what I say too. But mostly, I just am, terminally online and really involved in discourse. The really annoying. I hear the word discourse, and I start to salivate over video game discourse. So that's kind of the theme of this podcast. It'll probably be a little bit broader than just the Final Fantasy stuff, because Final Fantasy, despite being my entry into content, is maybe a good 10% or less of my experience with this form of media and my literacy of it. So thank you.
Okay, awesome. Hayes, can we hear from you, man?
Yeah, so I'm Hayes Madsen. I'm a video game trends writer is my official title for Inverse, but I'm also a freelance journalist, write for Rolling Stone and IGN occasionally. I've been covering games for about 15 years now. I was a small-time local journalist for a little bit before that in Denver. But yeah, I'm also a big RPG head and Final Fantasy head as well, and those are kind of like my areas of expertise, I guess, in terms of what I cover. Um, so yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm excited.
Appreciate you, man. So we have to address the elephant in the room when we're talking about Clair Obscur Expedition 33, because this was a really amazing game, but it was only $50. $50. And this is happening right now when the ceiling for game prices has been risen to like $80, right? Or rising to $80. And it might even go beyond that, because there's rumors that Grand Theft Auto 6 may potentially cost $100. We're facing an inflection point. Do you think that this is a necessary thing to happen for the long-term sustainability of AAA game development, or is it simply a reflection of bloated budgets and inefficient production pipelines?
It is necessary for the long-term massive scalability of AAA development, right?
Mm.
Um, in my view, the video games industry has now been, and I'm going to use this word, deliberately, In my view, the games industry has been infected by the tech industry, infected by this philosophy that scale is the god of all things. That we need to continue to have
Mm.
growth, more money, but not even just more money, but more production, more songs, just more hours. Nobody ever said that we need to keep doing that ever forever and ever. Nobody that I guess movies have done that. But even film, there's still smaller scale films. I mean, films going through a similar
Mm.
trouble right now too, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about how really only like the Marvel movies or the big blockbusters, Mission Impossibles and what have you, really only belong in theaters, and smaller engagements, more personal engagements or smaller productions don't. And it's really sad that this basically has infected the games industry. At least in the AAA space,
Mm.
one thing that's great is that the games industry at least is diverse enough to be able to support many different projects, including one like Expedition 33 or many others. Of course, we had Balatro last year as the
Mhm.
other most famous example. We got Lost Soul Aside, which is made by famously one guy, and of course, Hayes did a great article, I think, about how how only 33 guys, only one guy made this is like not like a real thing.
Sure.
It's obviously lots of teams and everything, but still, like we're not having 9,000 people making Diablo 4 or 7,000 people making the latest Call of Duty every year, or several hundred man orchestra, always on tap for the latest Final Fantasy to do 400 different songs in one game or something like that. So it's like, yeah, the increase is only necessary if you feel like that you need to do and keep making more and doing more. And I think there definitely needs to be a pause. There needs to be a kind of a rethink of how much more we need. Obviously, Clair Obscur is a beautiful game, right? But
Mm.
I still look at it as kind of like just a slightly better Xbox 360 version. Like it runs just like kind of pretty okay on my Steam Deck to the point that I'm playing it just fine. Actually, I did like the there was like the bouncing head boulder ball
Mhm.
that just like
Yeah.
attacks you like 20 times in a row or
Yeah.
whatever like that. I parried it
Rose
every
Price
single
game.
time with like
Yeah.
20 frames per second. You know why?
Yeah.
Because like I can hear like so much of the game, and we'll talk about the game so much more, but it's like
Yeah.
all about the audio there in terms of the,
Yeah.
the, the, the parrying, right? As
Mm.
opposed to the visual frames and everything. But we don't need that much more power. People say, "Oh my God, the Switch 2 looks like a PS4," and the PS4 made Uncharted 4, which is still a better looking game than most games today. It's crazy.
Mhm.
And EA still had to suddenly be like, "Oh my God, we didn't sell enough copies of Jedi Survivor, so let's just push out a PS4 version to kind of grease those wheels a bit." Maybe it turns out that we weren't really ready to jump to a next generation yet. Maybe we didn't need to scale up so quickly.
Mm.
Um, but and I have to think that the pandemic also like only made things worse in terms of people's views on the value of games and the audience size and the profitability. There's just so much going on, but yeah, it's a shame because we don't need Grand Theft Auto 6 to be $2 billion. Why? But
Right.
maybe.
Yeah, no, for sure. And one thing that you touched on, and I would love to hear from Hayes on this, is that like even with this game, the core team is 30 people. And with AAA team sizes, you may see like 300 or 400 people, but that's still not even everyone who's touched the game. Most games have a 4-digit number of hands, pairs of hands that have touched the game. And so that's how much bloat that we have. And so even, when we factor in how many people touched Clair Obscur, though it wasn't exactly 30, it was more than that. It's still a very impressive feat. And so, could you tell us a little bit more on your perspective on that? Do you think that AAA needs to keep pushing in this direction, or is it worth dialing it back? Because I agree with Gene that I still look at PS4 games. I mean, remember Horizon Forbidden West, which I think is still the best looking video game out there,
Mhm.
runs technically on a PlayStation 4, and it still looks pretty good even on PS4. So I,
Mhm.
I kind of wonder, are we reaching like a point where we're just getting diminishing returns on all this hardware? And we've reached the point where graphics are good enough and the experience is what counts.
So I completely agree with Gene on the fact that, the price ceiling for games, I think the writing has kind of been on the wall for years that prices were going to go up at some point. Of course, when wages don't go up, it becomes harder for people because people are getting priced out of video games. But I've talked to a lot of indie developers at GDC and Game Awards recently. And there's this kind of idea that, we're pumping more money into these AAA games, trying to turn them into these like super games, essentially, that appeal to everyone instead of trying to appeal to a specific crowd or a specific style of player. So these games become so big and so expensive that they can't fail. So it needs to kind of mass appeal. Whereas a lot of indie developers are saying, they're having trouble getting funding because so much of that money is being soaked up by the AAA side. But you're seeing these huge indie hits like Balatro or even Hades in some way that just seemingly come out of nowhere and blow up. But if you're taking that gargantuan budget for a AAA game and instead of banking everything on that one project, you're pumping it into a variety of smaller projects, theoretically you would have a bigger chance of success because you have more chances for it to hit that spark, to hit that potential to blow up. So I think it's interesting that, while the indie side of the industry and the AAA side of the industry are still very separate, there's overlap that's starting to happen there, especially as indies get bigger and more companies now start looking into funding indies. You have a lot of AAA companies bringing indies on for projects like Ninja Gaiden Ragebound or the Rogue Prince of Persia. You're starting, or, Strange Scaffold making their Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle game. You're starting to have a lot of small developers being brought on to work with big IPs. So I think that, hopefully we can kind of trend towards a future with like Expedition 33, where we have smaller teams working on a more diverse set of games rather than just these big super games that are too big to fail. And when they do, we see the results.
Right. The entire studio goes down alongside with it, right? So often, so many such cases, right? And of course, those games do have to sell an extraordinary amount in order to succeed, right? In the Final Fantasy space, we kind of saw that recently with like Final Fantasy 16, where it's like, 3 million should be huge. And we know that it sold more than that. We don't know how much more it sold, but like when we're getting to numbers like 3 million, and then the company can kind of come out and say, well, we were hoping for a little bit more on the tail. It's like, wow. It's like, what number is going to be like in the next few generations do these games have to sell if we keep going in this direction where the games keep getting bigger and more detailed? Where is the end to that? So, Clark, I'd love to hear from you on this.
I like what's been brought up about investment and publishing. I think it's really hard right now to get not just investment, but like there's a lot of dubious investment opportunities, and the investment landscape right now is really affected by the political landscape, tariffs, etc. And so you're seeing sometimes a lot of these we would call them indie or double A studios, getting sucked into these deals and projects. In fact, there was an Automaton article that was published today that sort of took a look at this company in Singapore called 3DI, 3D Investments, that has a tendency to bully its projects that it invests money into, and so there's this space where it's really dubious. And so when we see a big publisher, a triple A publisher, start to fund companies, I actually think that's a good thing. I usually think that there's a measure of accountability that usually comes into play, and that's something I actually have seen Square Enix do in a good way. I mean, believe it or not, like Square Enix and Bandai Namco work together on publishing each other's games for different regions based on like what specific market they have, and that'll benefit everybody involved. And like things like Power Wash Simulator has has Square Enix's name on it. And that's actually a really good little indie title. And they're really kind of inoculated from a lot of, the things and pitfalls that indies can go through when they have to get investment through dubious sources. And I'm using dubious as kind of a, boogeyman word. Every situation's different, but I think any of us that have been, like know developers and know kind of the industry a little bit have seen stuff like that happen. And you're like, okay, well, let's stay away from stuff like that. And how do you do that? As far as the actual price point, I've always been surprised that the game prices have stayed as low as they have for as long as they have. If I'm being totally honest, when I started, walking away from a 2-hour movie experience in a cinema, I was like, "Oh, video games are next." And I'm not defending price increases. I'm just surprised that capitalism has taken so long to catch up, and
Mm.
so that I think that's so. Again, this is not a justification, but I do know that every developer is sitting down trying to figure out how they're going to make their money, and that collectively, when the Switch 2 was announced and those prices were announced, there was a sigh of relief that probably sounded through, so many developer offices going, "Oh, thank God, I can raise the price of my game." And or conversely, I can not raise the price of my game, and that will increase its value proposition relative to the market. And Clair Obscur, uh, is one of the first examples of that really working, in my opinion, to the benefit of a game. Because, I remember all through reviewing it, I was like, where's the $50 part start? Because I remember going into it thinking, this is going to be a fun little $50 game that I am going to be as charitable as humanly possible to while reviewing, because I'm proud of the effort. And I don't actually think that's the best way to review games. I don't think you should review art based on the context of its development in all cases. I do think it should be a little bit of a factor, especially if you have a vested interest in the art form. But there is, something should be definitely held on its own artistic merit. But in terms of like scores, I would have been willing to fudge a little bit. But the whole time I'm like, okay, so instead what's happened is that this is a statement about art as an expression, and about the developer feeling really confident with the work that they did and the cost that it probably gave them. They probably did things like partner with Microsoft for things like Game Pass as a way to be able to get this product that they've put all this expression into in as many hands as possible, because they were instead confident about the art. So there's all these different ways to look at making the choice of pricing your game lower. That isn't just like, I don't think it's got enough value to justify, a quote unquote full priced game. And so, that's my addition to this topic.
Real quick
Yeah,
before I forget, I do think the way we price art is an interesting conversation, because look,
absolutely.
Expedition 33 is $50, right?
Yeah.
I love the soundtrack. I tweeted out that it is very evocative of Yasunori Mitsuda, and I saw that the Lorian Testard is a huge Xenoblade Chronicles fan. So I was like, can't be a coincidence, right? Like all the guitar riffs and the solos and everything like that.
Yeah.
It's so good, right? I want to buy the soundtrack, right? The soundtrack is $30.
Yep.
It's $20 less than the game. So you mean to tell me that the game is $50 and the
Yeah.
music itself is $30 for that? Like what? Like where? What is what? How do we judge this game? How do we price it?
Mhm.
I would have happily bought $70 for it, if anything.
Yeah.
But it's just very strange how we want to price art, and it feels like it's just a conversation that we just don't have at all.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
kind
I
of the
mean,
It's even
product
yeah.
more
aspect.
complicated in games. Yeah.
Yeah, in games it's super complicated, because you're looking at a movie quality cinematics with incredible performances. You're looking at a ton of expressive visual art. You're looking at a full soundtrack that is available within the game, that if you want that commodified into something that you can play elsewhere, nobody bats an eye at those prices, of any of those things. And so yeah, it is really, really complex to evaluate video games as an art. And those are conversations for financial experts that have a very fine-tuned understanding of market trends, supply and demand. And I'm sure the answer all lies within there somehow, but it does feel strange because this is all art.
Right.
I agree. Good
I agree.
counterpoint.
No, for sure, for sure. And it's just, I guess there's also this product aspect of games, right? And so we kind of have to turn the art into a product. And so on one hand, pricing art is a really tedious thing to do, and there's an entire history there that Clark is probably a lot more knowledgeable about than I will ever be. But for the consumer, they've been very adjusted over the last few decades of paying a set price for a game, and then that delivers the experience. And then Clair Obscur comes along, and during a time where we're having so much conversation about price and what it takes to actually deliver that experience, it delivers the highest user score on Metacritic of all time for games. So would you guys be willing to trade off some of that cinematic AAA polish in exchange for shorter, tighter, more affordable games? Do we need to reprogram ourselves on the idea that bigger is always better? What do you guys think about this?
I'll say first, 100% I would trade that. It's not even a question in my mind that I would trade off some of the AAA polish for more consistent game releases, more, just more of everything, or jobs for developers, even if that's an aspect of that. I just think that these huge bloated games, these massive open world games or massive RPGs, whatever it might be. I've reviewed so many RPGs in the last 2 years, and almost all of them are at least 60 to 100 hours or something. And it just gets exhausting. Even as someone who writes about games for a living, I am consistently exhausted by the sheer size of games that I have to play. I think there really is truth to there's that meme of I want shorter games with worse graphics. And I mean, I really do think there's truth to that. A lot of times I find myself really enjoying these short snippet experiences more. Recently, Promise Mascot Agency is one that I absolutely loved because it's an open world management sim. It's bizarre, but you can get through it in 12 hours. And I don't have to sink 40, 50 hours into this ridiculous management experience.
100%. I don't think there are too many games that I play nowadays, especially RPGs, that don't have one, if not multiple, and usually multiple parts, where I'm like, if the game didn't have that and we just got to the next point a little bit faster, I think it would have been a better game. And I think that there is a problem when I'm looking at, work and I'm thinking, if there was a little bit less here, it would actually be better. I think that's one of the most complicated situations you can really find yourself in, because it just goes to show that I think a lot of the times we're putting, 100 hours, 1,000 quests, we're putting these numbers on the experience in order to quantify, hey, we know that you think the price of games is really high, but we have all of these metrics, tangible things that we can show you that list off these marketing points and say, this is actually worth your money. And so, Gene, what do you think about this? Because I could tell you have something that you want to say about it.
The game I'm thinking of mine, and I think Hayes can back this up, is this Assassin's Creed Shadows. Bro, dude,
Yeah.
Yes.
I know we pick on Assassin's Creed all the time for being too long. And hey, look, I played Valhalla and I loved it, but the problem is that I played it over 2 years to finish that game. Most people won't do that, and I don't want to do that again.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm doing with Shadows. And here's the thing, what you said just now about man, if there was less of this, that the game would be a lot better. When you go into Assassin's Creed Shadows and you're finding the tombs to find the secret weapons, awesome content, rewards, new weapons, gear, right? But then, like every single tomb is just another block puzzle where you have to, where Yasuke has to kind of fumble around and just shovel shelves around and move things around, and you pick up the explodey pot and then you blow it up, you blow up the bomb. Every single tomb is exactly that. And it's like, but like, think about all the people that you had to hire, and think about how tired they were to be like, oh well, screw it then, like.
There's the
It's gonna
10th
be like
tomb
one out of
design.
1,000 tombs, so it's like I'm just gonna
Mhm.
copy and paste, And then so like I thought like, oh man, like I still love Assassin's Creed, so let me go back to
Yeah.
Assassin's Creed Mirage, which was a much smaller
Yes.
engagement, right? Enjoyed it, but then lo and behold, I was like, oh wait, I didn't finish the tombs though, right? In my
Yeah.
game, so I started to clean those up, and look at what I find. It's the exact same puzzles in Assassin's Creed Shadows, where I am moving shells around and throwing exploding pots at walls to open a chest to get something that is a little bit more valuable, because the loot there is a little bit more concentrated than in Shadows, but it's still the exact same idea over and over again. And they've been doing that since Assassin's Creed like 2, bro. Like I honestly know that's not giving to 2 enough credit. 2 had unique like jumping platform puzzle solutions, whereas this one just doesn't have that at all. It's just moving stuff around. So it's like
Yeah.
it's
I think I
the
think it
AC
fell
Shadow
apart at
story is
4.
not that long. So it's like you didn't
Yeah.
need to make the game this long at all,
Yeah. No.
I think, Gene, you might agree that, and this series has its own problems too, but I think one series that I've found really valuable in how it kind of evades that is Yakuza, where it kind of gives this spirit of diverse experience, where you have all of these mini games looped in, all of these side stories. You don't have to do everything, but there's a real diversity of content in those games that if you want it, you can go out and get these highly different experiences in every Yakuza game. But again, it's layered in a way that none of it is mandatory, and you don't feel like you have to do it, essentially.
It's to the credit of Yakuza that I only started to feel that they started to get a little copy and paste only in Pirate Yakuza. After like 20 games, I'm just like, okay, I know that I'm going to talk to this NPC and they're going to be sad about one thing, and then I'm going to do this, and then we're going to learn a lesson at the end, and the theme of sad is going to play. It happens like on the dot, right? But it's to Yakuza's credit that it took that long for me to start to get tired of that, and thank goodness they're pivoting towards Project Century and whatever. It looks like that, it feels like they understood that they're kind of like hitting the limits of their quest structure, and it's like, okay, maybe we can try to do something else, But then again, at the other hand, you get a whole pirate minigame, which is like a whole game in of itself. So it's like, yeah, they're still really caring about the diversity of experiences, and AC Shadows just doesn't do that at all. So
I agree.
Yeah, I agree. Clark.
My input on this subject is that AC Shadows is an interesting offender in the way that it values its time. I think that AC has had a huge identity crisis involving its narrative value, like locking modern day story behind like really weird sort of like online only exclusive
battle pass,
game as a service stuff. Really, I mean, I'm not a big nostalgia guy. I think nostalgia can be a very toxic evaluator for art. However, it is really clear to me that like AC lost something. Assassin's Creed lost something after the Ezio trilogy, and it was part of that like narrative fascination. I do think big chunk of the value for Assassin's Creed is going to get to be in these different real world experiences, but as a assassin or Templar badass, depending, and doing doing the checklists, doing the Ubisoft checklists. That's part of its value, but I think what really set it aside was this way to explore modern narrative stuff and the fate of the world and all this really out there kind of cool sci-fi stuff that's just it's such an afterthought now. It's not even part of the game. And where AC Shadows had like such a legacy to fulfill because of the discourse around the game coming up to it, and all the dumb historical stuff that people were going to be upset. There was a lot of pressure on it to deliver well, and I think it was a reliable Assassin's Creed, but the narrative has to be the weakest of any Assassin's Creed game I've ever played ever by like a long. Yeah. Shadows is just.
Hayes and I were talking about this too. Like, dude, the ending just drops the ball like so hard.
Dude, I don't like what happened.
It comes out of nowhere.
Yeah,
what is
this?
Like, oh, this is the end.
Yeah, I felt like this is No Country for Old Men or something like this. Is this a Coen Brothers film? Like, I had no idea that it actually ended. But
it's definitely the worst ending to Assassin's Creed since like Unity, I think. And I love Unity. Bless their friends.
Yeah, I actually do like Unity. I thought Unity was the right direction backwards. I didn't hate Syndicate either. But in terms of like this question about like, do they have to be these big gnarly? Do they have to? No. That said, though, video games as a medium are in a unique position to blow us the hell away. And so like there are like triple borderline quadruple A games that I have a lot of excitement for. And but you really have to have like every piece of that puzzle, every piece of that team working like just in fine synchronicity to really work. And also like as soon as you get into that level, the ability to take risks artistically diminishes because, again, we have investors that are like, we need an ROI. We need a return on investment. Don't take risks. What are you doing? And very few people have the kind of bully potential to let like those ideas really stand on their own. Kojima is kind of one of them. Right. And so like my most anticipated title of the year is not Grand Theft Auto 6, although that's way up there. It's Death Stranding 2. And it's because Kojima, has positioned himself in a way where he can take these risks at a quadruple A, triple A level. Now, I do not want to coin quadruple A as a word. Please don't. I'm sorry. Sorry I even spoke it. But the idea is that he's got all this power. And, I also think that Decima is just a really, really good engine. Sometimes I wonder about like the value of ray tracing and whether we needed that or if it retroactively ruined games like scaling development. Because I think the reason that Decima can run like at 280 frames per second in Death Stranding on PC on like a 1080 is because there's no ray tracing. They have fixed lighting, and I understand the value of ray tracing from a developer perspective, but it's one of those things where it's like you're chasing trends technologically. You don't always know what's going to like have legs, and so we always get kind of stuck in that technological mire. So like for me, like having this ultra effective engine of Decima, which had like the lightning in a bottle support of basically Sony owned Gorilla, and getting thrown to Kojima very early, like on a flash drive for Death Stranding 1, and then them having all this time, like you do get these lightning in a bottle projects that are really high spectacle, high end games that also get to experiment artistically. And so I do think that video games are in a unique perspective to do stuff like that. So I never want to see AAA games necessarily disappear. I don't want to see big spectacle games like go away because of the unique role they have in media. That said, chasing that is so precious. It is so hard. And so when you see a lot of big companies fumble on their way to do that. I think Ubisoft is kind of fumbling on its way to do that. To the point where they're now selling off again to dubious investors, and you're wondering, oh no, who owns that now? Square Enix is in a similar position where it's like, okay, we used to be like the AAA studio, like Final Fantasy VII. We often say, Ryan and I say, probably the first AAA game, right?
Agreed.
So
I completely agree.
like So now Final Fantasy is attached to this idea of AAA. Like it's as much a part of its identity as turn-based or chocobos or anything. That puts them in this dubious position. Like, how do they move forward? And I'm not.
That's why I was an FF7 hater back in the day, bro.
Yeah.
Because it's like this is too much.
Yeah.
FF7 doesn't need to do all this, and then it's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, it changed the industry or whatever like that. Of course.
Well, now it does apparently. You know, like.
But back then, though, I like maybe that was a canary in the coal mine, man. Dude, my friends used to choke me out because I was like, FF7 isn't a real FF. You know, it has all the sci-fi elements. What happened to the steampunk? You know.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Bro. FF6 Master Race. Let's go. No.
Yeah.
But you know,
but
it is kind of funny though too, when you think about it, that Final Fantasy essentially created AAA, and now it's seeing itself crushed by the same weight that it kind of created. You know,
the Shinra of it all, the
right?
Late stage capitalism of it all.
The first IP to do a full digital 3D movie too. You know, it's a groundbreaking franchise in media in general, right? Because of the ambition, and we don't want to. We definitely love ambition for sure. You know,
we do.
It's just sad to see Final Fantasy not be able to meet that. You know,
right. So I do want to talk more about FF in a second here before we get like directly into Clair Obscur. But one last thing, and this kind of ties into it, is that we're starting to see in recent years games like Baldur's Gate 3, Astrobot, and now Expedition 33 that aren't developed under the typical corporate risk-averse mindset. Do you think the success of these titles signal a shift away in what gamers value? Like not doing necessarily the big AAA thing anymore that's overly bloated, as we mentioned, that could be shorter, that could be leaner, and perhaps funding more of these AA titles instead, and they can still deliver these award-winning experiences? Or do you think that gamers just cannot be like pulled away from their AAA experiences?
I mean, I'll just tack on, because I was kind of in the middle of that topic anyways, that I really think the success of those games, Astrobot I'll kind of take out of the equation a little bit, because that was a very critically successful game. But you know, sales wise, it did fantastically fine. But like in terms of the difference between like Baldur's Gate and maybe even Expedition 33, like these breakaway successes, or Balatro, is that again, it's focused on setting trends instead of chasing them. And there is a natural ability to do so when you are not at the behest of investors or large AAA conglomerate. Like without people over your shoulders, like going ham with ROI, like your ability to take risks creatively is higher. And so what those teams have is they have people that want to set trends and aren't responding to trends. And I think that's the difference between, say, a Baldur's Gate 3 and a Final Fantasy 16.
Right.
Chasing versus setting.
Exactly. Hayes, do you have anything that you want to comment on with that?
Yeah. I'm hopeful that they can kind of start shifting us in that direction. But I think the hard thing they're going to have to fight against is the live service cash cow that everyone's still trying to get a piece of. Everyone sees how much money Fortnite makes. Marvel Rivals success. GTA Online is going to make an ungodly amount of money. So I think we have these, mostly single player games or co-op games in the case of Baldur's Gate 3 that kind of start to shift away from this idea. I think it's hard because they're up against that other side. We do see the money still in live service, but it's almost impossible to break into. But that doesn't stop people from trying to break into it. So like I said, I'm hopeful, but for me, it's too hard to say that these kind of games really genuinely signal like some kind of meteoric shift.
Yeah, and live service games so profitable now that they're willing to continue to do failures over and over and over again until they finally get that one live service game that finally takes off because it'll pay for all the past failures. And it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous
You
to
can say the
watch
same
the
for gotcha games too.
yeah. Yeah. Which are, I mean, that's basically a type of like, live service game too. So they basically will continue to kind of sink money into that, chasing that in hopes that eventually we're going to get that one live service game that's going to pay off all the debt that we have from all these titles that we just allowed to like money sink, you know, to just be like a huge financial sink. It's weird to see the industry do that, I think. But Gene, what do you think about all this?
Um, it's tough to say, man. For me, I am scared at people trend chasing, right? And this era of algorithms and everything. Like, man, I was like, you want to talk about me being a canary in the coal mine? Like, I definitely was like raising the warning signs of algorithms back when Facebook was starting to do that back in like 2008, 2009. And I was like, this is bad. This is not good if these valuable sources of information are only showing you things that validate your own existence and your own realities back to you. And that's just going to create an echo chamber. The United States itself, before the internet, was already kind of starting to form that way, where people started to move into neighborhoods with like-minded individuals, and now social media only just made that even worse and worse and worse. And then now, I've bemoaned like the fusion of tech and video games, and kind of goes back to what you said, Ryan, about being like a tech industry or whatever. Like, people are just trusting the algorithms, and the algorithms say Fortnite is the thing or Roblox is the thing, like I bet you that there's a game executive out there just literally just asking ChatGPT, hey, what do you think is the success of my game coming up right now? And then ChatGPT would like, oh yeah, it's gonna do great, and then it just goes straight forward, like I have no doubt that there are the industry is still littered with stupid people everywhere. I'm saying this as someone who is from an industry with a lot of stupid people in the media.
Right.
And seeing the media also getting infected again by the tech industry. Saying you got to do this, you got to scale up and do this, or whatever. I don't know, man. It's scary. But it's nice it's nice to see that the industry is still diverse enough to support these. But it's hard for me to feel optimistic that this is going to change anything.
Okay, so let's roll things back over to Expedition 33. Speaking of which, there's been a lot of needless, unfortunate discourse surrounding it and Final Fantasy on Twitter. We are all huge Final Fantasy nerds here. And it's clear that a lot of the discourse stems more from tribalism than genuine critique. That said, Expedition 33 has reignited the age-old debate about whether Final Fantasy should return to turn-based. I think all four of us can agree, probably, that Square has already struck gold with the combat system they introduced in Final Fantasy VII Remake. That's probably the way for them to continue. But my question for you all is, why do you think this always sparks controversy every time a new turn-based game is released? Do people not play other turn-based games? Or do they miss these sort of high-fidelity cinematic turn-based games of old? Gene.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, of course, recently. Even including today, like the Dragon Quest community has been sniping me, even though I have been like one of the most loudest and vocal supporters of Dragon Quest for some time now. It's very annoying, and it makes me wonder, like, dude, I don't know if I see this kind of like discourse and like anxiety and sniping and anger in other game genres. Like, Titanfall. Titanfall is a beloved franchise that's long and forgotten, right? And a lot of people bemoan Titanfall being gone. Like, I don't really see a lot of people be like, well, if you like Titanfall, then you should play this with this much movement or whatever right there. Why don't you check out Destiny? Why don't you check out this game, or why don't you check out Trepang Squared, or whatever, a great indie game, Trepang, which is inspired by Fear. But like, I feel like first-person shooter fans don't do this to each other. You know, I feel like sports games fans don't really do this to each other. Maybe it's because I'm just an RPG head and I'm pretty embedded in like, like the Final Fantasy community, definitely the Xenoblade community that I probably see a lot more. Definitely, there's a lot of weird anxiety in the Xenoblade community. I've definitely felt that before. I've probably even contributed to it before too, for sure. So it's like I don't. There's so much insecurity in some of the franchises that we love, and that includes Final Fantasy. We're like, oh my god, Final Fantasy is not the biggest thing in the world anymore. What do we do now? Um, Dragon Quest has never been the biggest thing in the world right now. We're so frustrated about that. Xenoblade Chronicles, no one's playing Xenoblade Chronicles, even though it's stuck on the Switch. I would love. I'm not the type of person to say Nintendo needs to release all their games on PC, but Xenoblade Chronicles definitely belongs on PC. The PC audience would love that series, no doubt. But it's like, yeah, maybe it's just like but we just want like part of it also is I think the magic of RPGs, right? That we are playing those roles. We inhabit these worlds. We have special, strong, such strong relationships with these characters that we dress up as them, or we ship them, or we even marry other people because they love the same characters or whatever that they do, right? So they become such a strong part of our identity that I think a lot of people have a hard time separating that fact. Where it's like, if you attack Final Fantasy, it's not about me at all as a person, if I'm not mentioning Dragon Quest at all, it doesn't mean anything other than I just forgot to mention Dragon Quest.
It's yeah.
So
No, I even
like I
saw
really do
like
think
on
that
Guillaume's
it comes down to
post.
maybe like why RPGs are so special, basically. So.
Yeah, I even saw on Guillaume's post like someone be like, "Why didn't he mention Dragon Quest when he like listed like all of those JRPGs?" And
See?
I'm like, was he supposed to list every Japanese game he's literally ever played ever? He was
I had
just
the same
giving an
thing happen.
example. Go on, Ace.
Yeah, on that article I wrote today on Blue Sky, someone was like, "Why didn't you talk about XCOM?" And I was like, "Well, because I'm talking about Japanese RPGs specifically, so
XCOM.
I didn't need to talk about XCOM. I know it's a turn-based RPG, but it's
Yes.
not
Oh my
relevant
god.
here."
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the thing. Like everyone's like, "Oh my god, look at Baldur's Gate." It's like, dude, like Baldur's Gate 3 is a fantastic game. I think it's brilliant. I think I think it's like a one of those great pyramid games like Red Dead 2, like an impossible achievement, right? I kind of don't like Baldur's Gate 3, man. I think it's
He
kind of
said
boring.
it.
I think it's kind of boring. So that's why like when I'm playing Expedition 33, I'm like, this is my jam right here.
Yeah.
This is what I wanted out of like white people RPGs, Like, I want them to be turn-based. I want them to feel good, as opposed to
Yeah.
Baldur's Gate, which is very dice rolly, and like I'm just like kind of like frozen with the amount of choice that you're given, And I love choices in games, Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
Baldur's Gate offers so much, So yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways to enjoy turn-based anything, including XCOM. But we're talking about Japanese RPGs in particular, and I think Guillaume definitely understands the differences between each one, and that's why he was able to. That's why Expedition 33 ended up becoming such a focused project at the end of it, because he really understood what these games are.
Clark, you're a turn-based hater. Why don't you tell us what you think about
That's I wouldn't classify myself that way necessarily. I've been burned out on turn-based games for a long time, which I know is surprising for a Final Fantasy guy, but I just have been. I've considered it more of a me problem. Like I love Metaphor. Loved Metaphor Refantasio. Fantastic game. The combat was an absolute chore for me. I was just bored. I was really in a Souls mood, and I obviously really like 7R's combat. I'm kind of a punishing guy, self-punishing guy, and so like I'd kind of worn that out, and so I can understand why anybody would have this sort of natural like distaste for turn-based games. But to answer this question, I don't actually really think this debate has anything to do with anything other than, and I mean this, Final Fantasy. I think this really started in the dead center of Fabula Nova Crystallis, when all of a sudden the series identity of Final Fantasy departed from this concept of turn-based games, and it as soon as it tried to take this risk, then every game since has added fuel to the fire. I feel like Remake had a lot of controversy around it because people had a nostalgic expectation that it would be another turn-based game like Final Fantasy VII was. But even still, it was effective and fun. And I saw more discourse around the departure from turn-based when we went to 15 than I did, from Remake, partially because I think the audience was already a little bit inoculated to the idea that Final Fantasy's identity was moving away from turn-based. But that's fueled every turn-based conversation I've heard since, and whenever you really look at the discourse surrounding things like, oh, see, Baldur's Gate proved that turn-based is still viable, what they're really talking about is like Final Fantasy 16. Like that's what they're really talking about. Like you dig into their profiles, you read what's going on, and they were mad that Final Fantasy 16 wasn't turn-based, and that this is the third game in a row that's a seemingly mainline Final Fantasy. And I know that Remake is outside of the spectrum of mainline because it's Remake, but to me, it's like not. To me, it's like a core part of their identity. And so I think this really, like, where this controversy lies is Final Fantasy, because obviously we know Square has been making turn-based games this entire time. We know all of that stuff. That stuff is trivia, and it's background to what people are really saying is that they miss their Final Fantasy because they are allergic to creativity, and that's fine for them. It's okay. Some people don't like that stuff. But as far as Clair Obscur 33 being a turn-based game that I like, the reason that I like, and this is again a me thing, the things about Expedition 33 that work for me are the things that separate it from other turn-based games. Finally having something to do with stakes during an enemy turn is absolute game changer for me.
Did you play Paper Mario Thousand Year Door though? Huh?
Dude, I've got that comment so many times in my YouTube review, like, oh, you've never played Paper Mario. And I'm
half joking, but
I know, but, and you're right, and I have, but that's part of the deal is the ways that kind of separate it from the standard turn-based experience were the things that made it stand out for me. Now, that's not everybody's experience, and that's fine. I think a lot of people loved the familiar parts of the combat, and that's fine too. But again, I really think the answer to this discourse is it's not any of the other games. There's been plenty, like Yakuza was able to go backwards, so to speak. Like, I don't really think, this is a real forwards or backwards thing, but it went from an action-based to a turn-based game. So that's a thing that can happen, and these are all really arbitrary things. So the discourse is honestly centered around people not being honest about the fact that the identity of their favorite thing went in a direction that is unfamiliar and scary to them. And because and Final Fantasy 16's combat was not my jam. I thought it was far too easy. It was action-based, and it to me, it just proved to me that Final Fantasy can do all sorts of bad combat. It can do good combat, and it can do all sorts of bad combat. I'm not saying Final Fantasy 16 was a terrible game. I think it had a ton of value. But in terms of combat, that didn't work for me either. But that had nothing to do with the fact that it wasn't turn-based. That had to do with the fact that its action system was ineffective for me, and that's what I think most discourse in general centers around people not actually being honest about what's really bothering them. So that's my answer.
Beautiful
I think
answer.
it really digs back to like what you said about Final Fantasy VII kind of creating AAA, that, you know, in the 90s and early 2000s, you know, Final Fantasy became almost this household name in gaming. But like other household names like Mario and Zelda, I don't think there was as clear of a path for how Final Fantasy like modernized to the next generation as those games were. That formula wasn't as obvious how you evolved that formula. And Square spent a lot of time experimenting and trying different things. And experimentation, to me, has always been kind of one of the core identities of Final Fantasy. One of the key parts is every game experiments, try something new. And I think for a lot of people, you know, in the West, Final Fantasy, despite other turn-based games plentifully releasing, Final Fantasy was the one that kind of defined that style of game. And when it wasn't that anymore, like you said, it was almost a identity of crisis. And because Gene said earlier, you know, especially with RPGs, people tie their identity so closely to these games. Mm-hmm. So it kind of all is just wrapped up in one big thing that becomes almost impenetrable to breach when this discourse comes up seemingly every time we get a new turn-based game.
Right. I think Square kind of poked the bear a lot too when they kind of delivered a lot of their reasoning why they wanted to switch things from turn-based to action. They were, to be fair, very transparent about it. Yoshi P has made comments about this. Kitase has made comments about this. Hajime Tabata has also commented on this before. And the reason is because, you know, as Yoshi P said it pretty plainly, they're investing $100+ million on making a new mainline Final Fantasy. And they don't think there is a big enough market for a AAA turn-based game of that size and budget. That's what it ultimately comes down to. And so, you know, you can love the systems, you can hate the systems. It has been a financially motivated choice. That's what pushed them in this direction in the first place. Now, as I mentioned, I think the reason that Final Fantasy VII Remake, that's now like the battle system that unifies the FF fandom. Most people you talk to, aside from some people who are very staunchly like in one camp for one particular game or another for various other reasons, they will unite around that battle system and say, okay, yeah, this is one of the best battle systems in the game, in the series, right? And one of the reasons that it is,
I think.
Gaming period,
ever.
Yeah. In my opinion, it's the best RPG battle system, period. Like with Rebirth, there was no RPG battle system I'd say that I like more.
If they make Baldur's Gate 3 remake with that combat system, I will finish Baldur's Gate 3 actually.
Yes.
I would play that. Not even lying.
Yes. Yeah. But but I think part of the reason why is because they had found that middle ground that didn't alienate the established audience who was into it, because they liked that turn-based style. And it was accommodating of people who wanted a more action-oriented experience. And I think that when you look at like 15 or 16, for example, the reason that it starts to get kind of divisive is that it does forsake not only the kind of experience of it being turn-based, of course, but it also forsakes the abstraction of what the turn-based system provided, right? Like the targeting elemental weaknesses, the buffs and debuffs, and all those sorts of things that were happening throughout the game. Those things don't get translated over in those systems. And as a result, it doesn't feel like a new way to necessarily experience the type of combat that you got from those older Final Fantasies in the way that Remake does. Because Remake brings like a sort of cinematic element to what I always imagined Final Fantasy VII's combat being like outside of the abstraction, if that makes sense, of two guys or three guys sitting in like a row, you know, running over and hitting an enemy. This is what I imagine the combat actually looking like. But it still gives me that freedom to be like, okay, this is a nice enemy. I'm going to target it with fire and do those sorts of things. And so there is sort of like this intuitive feeling that, okay, this is still providing me that Final Fantasy experience where I go into a menu and select a command to target the enemy appropriately, but it's also giving me an action game too. And I think that's why that system doesn't end up being divisive for this community. But then you go into systems that get entirely away from that abstraction in many cases. And then, you know, we start to have these debates about what is the gameplay identity of Final Fantasy. And, you know, as I mentioned, Square would put out those statements about, why we can't invest $100 million in like a turn-based game. That's precisely why, every time that happens, people, there's a big turn-based game success. And then everyone's like, see, told you were wrong. Turn-based games can have that type of success. But it's always tedious to say, right? Because most of these games that people do say is a success, none of them are as big as Final Fantasy and does what Final Fantasy
have
does.
The same budget.
Right, or has the same budget. So it's hard to compare, right? At the same time, I get what a lot of people are saying. I don't think that Final Fantasy 16 would have sold more or less if it was a turn-based RPG. But the problem is not that like action is really making Final Fantasy sell more. Because clearly, as we line up all the titles together, that hasn't necessarily been the case where we can say, like, definitively, action is making Final Fantasy sell more. In fact, the turn-based games still have overall sold more. With the great exception of FF15, in the 10 years of build-up and other, yeah. And
somehow still a goat.
Yes, I got the giant Noctis here.
The nice guy Prince, baby.
Yeah, let's go. Outside of that, it doesn't seem that that's been the case for 16, for example. So it's hard to definitively say that wouldn't have been the case. But also, Final Fantasy stopped doing turn-based like exactly at its prime, right? 10 was an amazingly well-selling game, huge cultural impact. And then we kind of shifted away with 12 and 13, where they tried to make things less rigid in terms of how the command-based battles were playing out. But we haven't really had, say, like a turn-based game or an ATB game on that level in modern times. As I guess you could include 13, but even then, 13 sold 7 million units. Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1 sold 7 million units. So the problem here hasn't been, to me, whether they're doing action or turn-based, because the core FF audience, no matter what you guys say on Twitter, you're going to buy it. You always buy it. Like, it doesn't matter. The problem is just simply they're not attracting new people. That's just all it is.
Yeah.
And whatever that issue is goes beyond action versus turn-based.
All the people who love Final Fantasy VII back in the day, most of the people could be dead by now. Yeah.
Yeah,
I almost
literally.
died on the way to. I almost died on the way to Rebirth, man.
Yeah, that's right.
You know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, that's a real reality. I almost didn't see the ending of Rebirth. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
people having kids, people, having other obligations, not gaming anymore, right? And so the idea with something like Final Fantasy VII would be like, okay, well, we need to pick up an entirely new audience with this remake, right? And I'm sure that they got tons of new people that haven't played a Final Fantasy before to play remake, to play 16 and all those games. But they aren't necessarily attracting them in large enough quantities to kind of replace all the people that they've necessarily lost. And so, yeah, I mean, ultimately, I don't think that their issue really stems from they're not doing turn-based anymore. Though I do think that there is room to maybe make a game that looks like 16 or Rebirth and have it be turn-based. I think that there is room for that. I just think that also the real thing just comes down to the fact that, whatever they're doing is not growing the audience enough. And if they could ever figure out something that does appeal to them in enough way, I don't think it even matters whether it's going to be action or turn-based. It just needs to have that universal acclaim, have that virality to it, have the word of mouth to it, and people will pick it up and play it.
It's a hard question. And I think, this is too big to really dive into, but I think Final Fantasy XIV is an interesting part of this equation too. 14 has been monumentally successful, and it's very Final Fantasy, but clearly the new fans that 14 attracted didn't translate over to the rest of the series. 16, that was something they tried to extrapolate with 16, because, Yoshi P, he's the same guy that does 14, and that was very much a part of their marketing, but it just didn't work. So I think Square Enix is going to have to figure out something, like you said, of how do you bring new people into the series. I don't know about pleasing old fans because at this point I don't know how you do that. But I think the core question is, what does Final Fantasy do to like feel new and fresh again enough to that people who've never touched it want to play it?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And
Any
that's I think that's the thing, is it's just about relevance. And I think relevance has nothing to do with any of the stuff that we're talking about, unfortunately. It would turn-based action. Again, this is about making trends and not chasing them. And I think the biggest trend chase that I've ever seen from the brand involved just like copy pasting like 5-year-old Devil May Cry combat into Final Fantasy 16 and calling it fresh. Like I think that is the exact opposite of what they needed to do. But at the same time, I totally understand why they did it. Game of Thrones, DMC, those things all felt like, the chasing the Monster Hunter crowd in Japan while chasing the Game of Thrones thing, but then development times and console shift over using a proprietary engine that was changing caused the development hell of that thing to just really outpace the trend. And that's just that's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. I do think legitimately, if Final Fantasy 16 would have come out as is 3 years prior, probably would have done a lot better. That's just the
100%
way that it
agree.
is. Yeah.
100% agree.
Yeah.
Honestly, if it had came out the way it is, but on like PlayStation 3,
Yeah. Oh,
Oh
done
yeah.
yeah,
really well. Yep.
dude, it'd be a legendary game at this
Yep.
Oh,
point.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. It's at this point we're going to dive into spoilers for Clair Obscur Expedition 33. It is highly advised that you first finish the game and then come back to the rest of this podcast discussion. If you have not finished the game, this is your opportunity to click off of the podcast now. So let's talk about our experiences and then actually playing the game that has brought us together today. Clair Obscur Expedition 33. What was your experiences playing it? Any criticisms? And where was it strongest for you? Hayes, it's off.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've reviewed a game that I was like this engrossed in ahead of time. So much so to the fact point that like I felt like I had to talk to someone else during the review period, like because I hit some of those big story beats, and I was like, I have to talk to someone else about this. I can't just like have this buzzing around in my head. Um, I really loved it in almost every way. There are some minor criticisms I might have, like some of the environments can be a little confusing without a map. I don't think it needs a map, but some of the environments can be confusing. But I think the way that the game kind of interrogates the nature of grief is really what hits the most for me. Um, there's a big twist, there's multiple big twists, but the big twist in Act 3 um, kind of didn't sit very well with me at first. I didn't like it. But after I beat the game, I had the time to sit on it for like a week. And I just kept thinking about it more and more. And as I thought about it more, I really started to appreciate that twist and kind of how it turns a lot of the story's themes on its head and kind of digs into like how grief molds our lives and how we can't not being able to move past grief, how that molds your life and your worldview and things like that. So that's what hit the most for me personally, even though I do love the combat system and I love the music and I love the characters. Those are all things that I love and don't have any downsides there. And I just think the way that it all comes together is what's really impeccable for me.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny because I think there are multiple points in this story that I was like, well, I don't know if there's any recovering from that. And then
Yeah.
somehow, some way, they still pulled it off. And I like each time I'm like, no way. Like this time for real, there's no coming back from this. And then I get to the next act and I was like, oh God, this is good. This is good. Clark, tell me about your experience with it.
Well, I like the map design a lot. it felt so fractal and so like Soulsborne that you can go like in the very first real map, even you're like, okay, here's a little winding path, and then that winding path leads to more winding paths, and you're like, oh man, this is an experience. And every single level, every single stage operates this way. And I spent a good chunk of time in the game, probably the most out of all of us. And I'm surprised every time I go back and find more stuff, because there's paths within paths within paths. And the reward for that stuff is usually really it's oftentimes like lore and context, and I love stuff like that. So that's the very Elden Ring style of the experience of the game. I obviously really like the combat. The combat is really, it's perfect if you go through the game with the idea that you're going to go through the main title and then break it in post game. That's the best way to experience it. I broke the game a little too early and accidentally deleted the super boss. So I don't even really know what it's like to play against the super boss in a real way, because I found some billion damage strat. I actually just beat one of the devs and his damage record, but he says he's coming for me, so he probably will come for me. But the combat's really fun for me because the stakes are so high, and I always just felt like I was kind of on autopilot through combat, to the point where if I get into this mode, and this may just be a me thing, where I'm like autopiloting through gameplay, when I get up to a story beat, sometimes my mind is kind of preset to autopilot through it, and so I have to rewatch stuff, and I hate having to rewatch stuff. I never felt that way. My criticisms of the game, I do think in late game, in post game, there's some power dynamics that kind of falter, and I do feel like there was some setup that maybe couldn't necessarily come to fruition. Like there's getting all of the mana rooms, for instance, doesn't really give you anything, and then there's these like kind of red herring spots around the map that seem like they're going to be this big deal or answer some question that you have, that don't. But that stuff is really minor, like not enough to even subtract a point, for me, of a score. As far as the like kind of the plot stuff, there was two subversive elements of the plot that I was in the same boat as you. I'm like, oh, this sucks. This is, I see why this is. I was like, oh, here's the $50 hook, right? This is why it's $20 off. And again, we know that this is going to be kind of a spoilery conversation, so spoilers ahead. But when Gustav dies at the end of Act 1, and then Ben Starr shows up seemingly as himself, right? So he like walks into the game dressed as Squall, who I know Ben. We know Ben.
Yeah.
Ben, and Ben's favorite Final Fantasy is Final Fantasy VIII. And he's got this Lionheart jacket on. He's got a scar on his face, and I'm like, did Ben write the last half of this game? What's going on? And then you also see, and like Ben is a tremendous VA, and the voice actors do a tremendous job throughout the entire game. So don't take this the wrong way, but I saw an immediate decline in the quality of cutscene interactions, right? Before Gustav dies, you would see like very organic back and forth. Like they would actually interrupt each other and things would change. And so it made it like, my developer involved brain immediately had these flags go off saying something happened, right? This is the result of something happening. Like this is probably Daredevil Born Again's fault, and Charlie Cox got taken off the project. That was before me getting any kind of insight from the devs, whatever. Now I'm still not. I still would probably not believe any story they told me on the truth about that. But now I'm kind of impressed with the fact that if that roadblock did exist, that they were able to come up with an incredibly sublime narrative experience with really well developed characters that had complete arcs. Even Gustav, like, I'm impressed that they did what they did with that, if that did happen, right? If that thing happened. I'm not saying that it did. Nobody on this podcast is officially saying that that happened. And then once we got to like the big reveal, as we find out that like the meta nature of the universe, in at the end of Act 2, where seemingly the whole world falls apart, and we get a very like a with a lot of informational economy, this explanation of how the world system really works. That there's a real Paris, that there's these factions called the painters and the writers, and that we've all been in a painting, and there's been plenty of writing on the wall that this was all some kind of like meta journey the whole time. So like that part wasn't necessarily a huge surprise, but it's like now we come back in, and Mael reclaims her entire identity as as both Alicia and Mael, and she's got painter powers, and then she only brings back CL and Luna, and you're like, okay, all right, this is whatever. That I had that same kind of discomfort I think that Hayes had, where it's like, okay, how are they going to make this work? And I want other people to talk about that before we get into like how the ending actually did work. But all I'll say before we have the final talk about what the themes were of the game is that they ended up bringing me back on the story. And I do consider it high art, and in the most elitist, snobby, hipster way I can possibly mean that. I think it really does deliver on some subverso, if you will, themes with the characters and grief and stuff like that. So I'll move my time though to Gene.
Awesome.
Yeah, Night Sky, you actually know my journey pretty well because we were communicating. I had this game for review, but I was just kind of slacking because I was just like, I just want to wait. And, the Devil May Cry Netflix series just came out, and I'm just in a real weird Devil May Cry mood. But then I got to playing it. And my first impressions were mid, actually, right? And it's mostly because of the look of the game. I don't really like the Unreal Engine look of the game, I know that the art director, who is very talented, but I know that he's a big fan of BioShock Infinite. I think BioShock Infinite looks ugly too, So I am not as impressed with the prologue as everyone else seems to be. Everyone just plays a prologue and they're like, "Oh my god, this is the game of the year," and I'm like, "You guys haven't even gotten to the good part yet, guys. Come on, And I thought it was very, very sad, and I hated the world map music. It was like a funeral song, and I was like, "Oh my god, I love the world map." And trust me, guys, I'm gonna have plenty of lovely things to say about the game. Just,
I
just go
hated
with
the
me
world
here.
map music so much.
Hmm?
So I'm with you
Well,
on the world map music. I hated it.
yeah. At least the first one. Like, I actually like the end game one a lot better. Like, it's actually quite beautiful and contemplative, right? I really didn't like the world map music. I was definitely wanted something a little bit more forward moving, forward charging, and it felt like I was like, oh, here's this dead world, and go figure out this dead world. And Mael even says, everywhere I see is death, 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 and I'm like, yo, girl, I know, I'm getting a little tired of this, right? And then Act 1 ended, and maybe my problem was Gustav.
Wow.
Wow.
who I didn't really have like a strong attachment towards until the end of the game. As BabySeal said, even Gustav kind of comes full circle by the end of the game, right? Now I'm replaying the game. I'm in New Game Plus. I have a
Yeah.
deeper appreciation for Gustav's place in the story, what
Yeah.
he means to Mael, and how he becomes kind of like a primary motivator for the whole adventure. Actually, right? He's kind of like, spoiler alert, he's a little bit. He is this game's Aerith, in a sense,
Yeah.
right? Just getting ganked by this game Sephiroth, which is Renoir, and we have plenty to talk. I have plenty to talk about him too. But after I had the complete opposite, where once Ben Starr showed up, and I'm not like, oh, I'm not a Ben Starr super fan. He's a friend of mine, right? But I'm not
Yeah.
like gonna like glaze him every time he shows up. But I
Sure.
was like, oh, I'm a little interested in where this goes. This is a weird way to this is a weird ass way to introduce a character, right?
Yeah.
Who the hell is this guy? And I don't understand what's going on. But what really started to hook me in was when Mayo started to have those flashbacks.
Mm.
The game started to go into 4-3, and I was like, okay, game, all right, like you're actually playing with format here. I'm gonna start paying a little bit more attention now, right? I'm glad I did. Because yeah, from Act 2 on, like I was really, really hooked into the game. Like I started to really enjoy the environments more. Look, I don't like the Unreal look of the game, but it speaks to the character design and the art design, that all of that was able to kind of punch through and still impress me and still make me think, wow, this is gorgeous, this is beautiful, this is evocative, this is making me think about this world and what it means, and what these backgrounds mean, and what these environments mean, and what these different creatures mean, and the way
Yeah.
everyone is dressed. Um, I do want to talk a little bit about the combat, which always hooked me in. I never thought the
Yeah.
combat was.
Yes.
I always thought the combat was immediately the strongest part. One, I think an underrated part, and we can talk. We can talk all day about I love the fact that you can defend and parry. I'm totally with Baby Seal in that. Finally I have something to do on the enemy's turn. To the point where, as a Street Fighter fan and a Sekiro fan, this definitely spoke to me. Although it can get pretty exhausting. I was a little worried about, people getting filtered through that. And sure enough, a lot of people are getting filtered through that, right? But as for me, I loved it. I think an underrated part of the combat system is how much work the audio design is doing.
Mm.
The animation work is freaking flawless too. Like just the way the characters like enter into the screen. I love it. I love it every single time I go into battle, right? And just seeing Mael just like do like her little on-guard pose or whatever like that. But the audio design is really working overtime to really impress upon the audience this level of impact and boom that's happening. Not to mention, of course, the parrying mechanic, which is very much audio like audio cued, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Once I stop looking at frames and I start listening to what the enemies are doing, I really, really locked in. And then that's when I was able to start blocking these 10-hit combos and everything like that. And I was able to beat the super boss. I did not delete the super boss before.
Yeah.
I did delete the other super boss. I guess we're spoiler free now, right? So I did delete.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead,
I
please.
completely deleted Alicia.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
Right.
I have no idea what she does. Zero idea.
Yeah.
Because she did
Yeah.
not get a turn, and it was
Yeah.
just over. Like I killed her in 500 million
Mm.
HP, and I was like, damn, that sucked actually. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel really sorry for guys like you and Blitz who deleted Simon, because that was a hell of a fight. I had
my
a
God, yeah.
wonderful time. But I really do think that it's the audio design that really it's kind of like the glue that holds it all together. And we talk about Final Fantasy 16. Look, Final Fantasy 16 was supposed to work for me. I'm a Devil May Cry nutcase, as I mentioned
Yeah.
earlier. I loved Devil May Cry series. Even the Netflix series, which I hated, I still end up liking because it's Devil May Cry. So I really just wanted to play Devil May Cry. But Final Fantasy 16, for some reason, just lacked a real sense of impact. Like when Clive is like punching as Ifrit, it's like it kind of goes as opposed to boom as Clair Obscur does. When you do the
Yes.
parry counter attacks, there's nothing
Mhm.
that feels like I can't remember the last time like an action in a game, in a turn, not even a turn-based game, an action game felt as good as doing a whole team parry attack
Oh yeah.
after like you're hitting the last hit, and then the entire team literally leaps into action
Yeah.
to counterattack, and you see that big number go up. Not even in Act 1, like in Act 2, Act 3, when you see 50,000,
Yeah.
100,000, and of course now at the level of the game that we are at, like millions now at this point. It always feels so
Billions.
good. The team
Billions for
jump
Clark,
parry is
yeah.
awesome, and it's a
Yeah.
lot more forgiving. And Nice Guy, we were talking about how I think, a lot of people kind of underrate and undersell the importance of combat in Final Fantasy, right?
Mm.
Because after all, Final Fantasy was supposed to be called fighting fantasy.
Mhm.
Fighting was literally in the name of it. And people forget, we talk, people are getting at me about Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. Dude, I played both games when they both came out, okay? You know what I like better? It was Final Fantasy because you could actually see the swords
Yeah.
swinging. So
Yeah.
that helped me bridge the gap between, an RPG and like a Baldur's Gate or D&D style RPG versus a JRPG, which is what Clair Obscur is, Um, and then so to see this game kind of, evolve that into, audio design, animation, action, your build and everything like that. It's all like a beautiful, beautiful symphony of systems that I couldn't believe that this small team put together. Like everyone keeps talking about the presentation and the writing and the graphics and the music, which are all great. But like for me, like I'm astounded that this small team who never made an RPG before was able to just like lock in and suddenly make one of the best RPG systems of all time. Period. You know.
Yes.
The Picto and Lumina system is
Yeah.
so
Oh, it's brilliant.
comprehensive and
Versatile. Yeah.
versatile and customizable.
Yeah.
Well, my Verso now is well over 1,000 Lumina, so he just like he just has all kinds of things. When you start a
Yeah.
fight, like all these buffs just start showing up on the screen like right
Yeah.
away.
Yeah. It's all text.
Yeah. But then also the amount of like this is how I knew that I was playing like a pristine turn-based game that was on par with Persona and Dragon Quest. It is when you're actually considering each turn and you're thinking of
Mhm.
turns ahead, And of course there's turn order that's from Final Fantasy X, right?
Yeah.
And it's like when you're really, really starting to think ahead about what you're going to do. And that's how guys like you, BabySeal and Blitz, our friend out there who's been making some great content on YouTube, some great tutorial content on really getting these damage numbers up.
Mhm.
That's how you guys were able to do it because you guys are able to really kind of think ahead about your party composition. And now I'm like, oh, auto death, and then death, and then death breaking death,
death. Yeah.
breaking
Yeah.
death, which that was the missing key for me.
It's
I was like, oh,
broken.
that's how
Yeah.
you get it.
Yeah.
So yeah, just seeing your characters like die, come back up, and inverted and everything like that. Like, there's so much going on. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, and that's why, like, I just tweeted out like this is truly like Xenoblade Chronicles 4. Like because Xenoblade also has a lot of that flexibility to get those big damage numbers up, particularly the one that just got released, Xenoblade Chronicles X, which I love
X.
too.
Yeah.
I'm just eating well this year, and then, so to get a game this good right away, like just like I was so skeptical. I was like, this is impossible. You can't be doing this, but they did it. Um, and I'll talk real quick about the end. In terms of criticisms, and we can talk a little bit deeper into that. I do think that the ending, I actually love the meta narrative part of it. Like it was exactly the story I hoped it would be. Not saying that this was predictable or anything like that.
Mm.
I'm just saying that I really hope that they went that route, and they totally did in terms of having them,
Yeah.
having creators as a stand-in for God, right? I love that
Yeah.
shit, And this is how we are able to hit the JRPG trope of God and make it really, really fun, Way more fun than Ultima in Final Fantasy 16, to be quite honest,
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Sure.
Yeah.
which is awful, an awful final enemy, to be quite clear.
Yeah.
And then but to have that personal connection to these
Yeah.
gods, of this world, and there's many of them,
Yeah.
was really fascinating. My criticism is that, like, the other characters kind of fell by the wayside in the main story. Luna and CL don't really have a lot to do with the ending. What makes up for it, though, and why this becomes a minor point is because, again, those quote unquote loyalty quests, as Mass Effect point, right? When you're
Yeah.
actually doing the campfire scenes, dude, the campfire scenes are so good.
They're so good.
All of
I
them,
was
yeah.
not really into the characters until I started to do the campfire scenes, and I was like, "Oh, this is where like the meat of the characterization and the writing is going." And like the
Yeah.
conversations flowed very well. They felt natural. They felt personal and real. And it's so funny. I don't mean to talk crap about another game that came out this year, right? I liked Avowed, right? One of Avowed's main selling points or main features was it had a campfire system that
Yeah.
sucked ass, man. Like, it was awful. The dialogue was terrible. The characters were terrible. And in the campfire system, the dwarf in Avowed literally tells you, well, I don't really have a lot going on, so I'm going to join you anyways. Like, I have a member of my party who has nothing to do and is there in the story for no reason at all, and they just say it out loud. Whereas, like, the stakes of Expedition 33 were set very much in the prologue that I
Yeah,
hated, right?
prologue.
Or not hated,
Yeah.
but like, they didn't really impress me that much. But the stakes were already there. So for them to kind of build upon that in the campfire and build all this lore of CL's backstory and her, you even find out her relationship with SK, who's a
Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful character. SK is like definitely one of my favorite characters in the game. I call him French Totoro. He is a vehicle. He is friendly. He is powerful and lazy. I love him so much. Seeing him in the ending like broke my fucking heart. You know,
Yeah. Oh
like
God.
like
You
it
know.
was.
You know.
I was
You
like,
know. I was gonna
stop
say. You
waving
know
at me,
who?
bro. Stop! Don't do that. You know.
Yeah.
You know who seeing at the end like broke me? It was Lune.
Oh yeah,
Because
oh,
she
dude,
just.
yeah.
Oh, in
Yeah.
the verso
Listen,
ending.
Ending.
Speaking, yeah, in the verso ending, and like speaking as a man, you ever like had like a woman just like deeply disappointed in you, and she just it was the sitting on the floor too, combined with that like I'm so deeply disappointed in you, like look, that like I was like this is this is destroying me.
And this was
That's-
before I thought
Yeah.
that romance was like an option. I didn't even know romance really existed in this game. Like that was kind of a
Yeah.
surprise. But like, dude,
Yeah.
that would have killed me if I actually romanced Lune before, and then like that happened. I'm like, no, I'm going the other ending for sure. You know.
Oh, I did. I romanced her. Actually, I romanced both of them, and
Yeah,
it's
for
it's
sure.
actually funny because if you do that, they both know and they're just cool with it.
Yeah, they're cool with it. Yeah, oh, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, cool.
Yeah.
It's,
Well,
they're
yeah,
French.
'cause
That's why.
CL
This is what the French do. You know. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
CL's got Pierre coming back right at the end, and but yeah, SGA being like saving her twice, like that was a huge revelation too. Like that's wild, like that they just it's just really good writing. Like that's just good writing, and that overcomes a lot of stuff. I do
does.
think we should maybe just like let's talk about the ending. Like, so as a setup for the question, there's two endings. Spoiler alert: there's two endings, and just in one of them, you choose to side with Mael, who is Alicia in the real world, who's made a decision to go in the painting. She has memories of both her experiences as Mael, and Mael was created as like a last ditch effort to hide her away from Renoir when she entered the painting, like years prior. The paintress actually saves her and paints her as a baby, and she gets raised as Mael. At the end, Mael gets gommaged, but real Alicia, jumps back in the painting and sort of takes her memories and her childhood and her attachment to this very real world, despite the fact that it is a fictional world, has all of the
I'm joking.
yeah, it has all of the agency that you would have, that you would expect from a functioning world. And I mean, let's be real, they're all fictional characters. Alicia's fictional, the painters are fictional, but this attachment and real love to these characters that have their own arcs. Like Luna has parent issues, right? Like we learn all about her toxic relationship with her parents, right? So she has real things that she's sacrificed, and she has all this agency. So Mael, through her perspective, she chooses to preserve that world at the cost of her own sanity. And the other painters around her know that that's got diminishing returns, but it's still her choice to make, and she makes it. And we get this kind of really like the most French ending imaginable, where they're like all in this opera house, and then like there's this dilapidated performance by Verso, and then a cut to like a single frame cut to Mael's like distorted face. You half expected like the black words to go thin, and then the credits to roll. But in a way, like that's kind of like an ending that considers all of the inhabitants of that world. All of Luna's struggles. You see Gustav, you finally get Gustav back. He doesn't say a word, obviously.
I was like, he's not gonna say shit right here. I know.
Yeah. We know where Charlie Cox is, and it's not here. Yeah, obviously, and Sophie's back and everything, but in some ways I watch that ending and I go like, okay, like that was her choice to make. That was the most empowered, most accurate ending. Like, it sucks because there's grief. And then you see the other ending, and I'll let you guys talk about this, and it's Verso's ending, and Verso ejects Alicia from the painting, essentially dooming all of its inhabitants to permadeath, right? And some of the inhabitants sort of understand it, CL and Monaco and probably Esquier, his ride or die. But Luna, who's really put all of her life into trying to break the system, feels
Oh my god, I even think
so
about
much
that.
heartbreak
Jesus. Oh my god, yeah.
from the
Yeah.
powerlessness.
Like the generations
think
of pressure like that was on her, right? Yeah.
Right. And you can really feel like that's the one that, like, from what little I read of the writer, like, it feels like that connects the most to her experiences, right? That felt so personal. Was Luna's upbringing and struggle, right? And so for her to have that really honest reaction, you understand that. So it's like this impossible choice. And then you're looking over at first when I saw like CL and them like accepting Verso's choice. I'm like, okay, it's almost coming across of like, well, we know we're not real. It doesn't matter. And, or, that they just understand Verso has this impossible choice. He loves his counterpart of a sister, but it also harkened me back to, I'm not sure if any of you guys have seen Weathering with You.
Yep.
But it's this really interesting indemnification of sacrifice culture. Like, the whole concept behind it is that, most of the inhabitants of this world that's built around survival based on one person's sacrifice, that cycle gets broken and that one person doesn't get sacrificed, and then catastrophe hits, and most of the world is okay with it because they're like, that wasn't our choice to make, right? And so you see like that, like full, like non-myopic, selfless view reflected in CL, who's already like struggled with things like suicide, understands Verso's perspective, as this really, like, it's just, there's so much complexity in it. I want to know what your guys' thoughts are, but I loved that there's no clear right ending. And I loved that both endings explore all of the topics of grief and the way, and how does art die? What's the value of art? Is there diminishing returns on art? Can art be toxic if you get lost in a fantasy? Or is there any real way to judge that stuff? Like, the way that it explores that stuff was really profound to me.
What I
What are you guys'
love,
thoughts?
what I love though too, especially, is that
Yeah.
both endings, I think, on their own would not necessarily be the greatest ending, but it's the synergy of the two endings
Yeah.
together
You need
that
both of them.
makes
You
it,
need both
yeah,
of
that
them.
makes both of them like,
Crazy.
like
It's
gives you the
weird.
full perspective, right? Because I think
Yeah.
if I just watched one of them, I wouldn't be like, oh, like this is like a great ending. But when I watched them both together, I was like, oh, this is art. This is art.
Mhm.
There's actually
Yeah.
there's actually a specific part that I think really harkens to that. That's my favorite part of both endings. When you choose Mael's ending and she's holding Verso in her arms and he's just saying over and over, I don't want this life. Like, I didn't ask for this
Oh
life.
yeah.
And I think
Oh my
that is
God.
really remarkable, where, like, yes, that ending is giving Mael her agency and her
Yeah.
ability to choose, but she's getting that at the expense of someone else's choice
Right.
too. Like, Verso knows that he's a copy of the person that created this world. And he's
Yeah.
been forced to watch his own family, a copied family, but his own family, he's been forced to watch each one of them systematically die.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want to live anymore. He wants it to be over. He wants to pass on to whatever else there might be. But in order for Mael to kind of get that moment to embrace this world, she has to accept that she can't fulfill Verso's wishes. And then that kind of reflects on Verso's ending, where, like, he's betraying Mael's wishes because he wants to end things, but he also wants her to have a normal life as a person. So that's why he ejects her from the painting. I think it's just that one scene in particular that really enriches kind of like the opposite directions that these endings head in.
Yeah.
I agree. Do you guys view the people inside of the canvas as strictly fictional? Because I feel like the story was like really trying to say the opposite.
I agree. Yeah, I think
Yeah, and
there's
I want to
clear
say,
intent. Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, I think Luna's reaction alone, and then also you saw off the branch that you're sitting on. If you try and say that, these fictional characters that have painted these fictional characters are somehow less fictional than the fictional characters inside the painting, like
Mhm.
it kind of undercuts the very meta narrative of the story. So that's a really hard, like, line to draw if you have characters that have full arcs.
Yeah, no,
I
I
think
completely agree.
obviously the intent is that these are real people.
Hmm.
And earlier I criticized like kind of like the realistic, unreal look of the game. I also think that that's intentional to
Hmm.
really, really make you feel like these are real people. That's why the voice acting is so on point. That's why that's why they really try with the facial animations. They don't always hit, and that's where the $50 comes in, right? Kind of like the edges that AAA would sand off, right? But
Yeah.
the intent was there to focus on these people, to make them seem like real people, give them real history, lore. That's why these campfire conversations made these people feel so much more real than a lot of other characters that we've been playing for a lot of RPGs. Again, like Avowed is made by Obsidian, and Obsidian are some of the best writers in industry. They know how to make realistic characters. But still, Expedition really, really focus in on giving these people, feelings and pain and emotions and joy. Like, oh my God, dude! Like again, I mentioned about how much I didn't like Gustav, but when I replayed the game and Mael and Gustav are starting to throw rocks again, and they just start talking about, like, oh my God, my arm and blah blah blah, and like you don't always have to hit whatever, right? Like that started to get me. Like
Hmm.
again, I really really started to understand Gustav and his role because I started to really feel like I have a history with Gustav now. Like I remember him and I miss him. And I
Hmm.
understand Mael's connection with him. So all of that makes the ending so powerful because it's like, damn, like we really are killing real people, but Mael, you got to move on, girl. Like that's another, or Alicia, you got to move on too, right? So that's the
At
thing.
the expense of the universe, Gene, or their universe.
Just a pocket universe, right? But then that's the thing, though. It's like spoilers for Xenoblade Chronicles, but Xenoblade Chronicles also has something to do with pocket dimensions too, right?
Hmm.
And it's like they don't really, but that series doesn't really address whether or not these people are real or not. You just kind of assume they are, but there is a kind of a question, like, are these people real? Are they not? Is it a simulation? Who knows? Uh, I
There's a
really,
whole
really appreciate.
dual universe thing too in that series.
Exactly, yeah, right. But so that's why it's like that's why I really appreciate like the intention behind Expedition 33 and its world. And even though I do prefer Verso's ending like as a from a moral standpoint, I actually do love Mayo's ending better. Like overall. Like I think it is a braver ending. It's dark. It I think it correctly centers Mael as the main character of the story, which is funny because
Hmm.
I was telling Night Sky, I was like, oh yeah, oh my God, this game is subverting expectations. They're putting 30-year-olds as the main character. Nope, turns out it was a 60-year-old that was the main character the whole time. Back to JRPG nonsense all over again. I love it. I love it.
Right.
Love
Yeah.
it. Great stuff.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that too is that throughout the game, they were kind of asking Mael, why are you going on this expedition? You have so much life
Yes.
ahead of you. And then that kind of gets turned on its head where it's like, when you find out that Mael is Alicia, and then it's like, why are you throwing away your life in this canvas? Right. And so I love how that theme evolves into her being young still and then throwing her life away from two different points of views.
Yeah. And I mean, and also there is the real, like it's a very uncomfortable topic, but Alicia's, disfigurement and how uncomfortable that makes her life outside. Like, that's a real topic for escapism. As you look at
Yes.
the
Yes.
what art can provide to those people, and it's like such an impossible choice. Like, what how do you really make those impossible evaluations on what's a better existence from like a
Mhm.
top down experience? And the fact that there's two endings is sort of lets you know that they do give an answer to that, and it's that you can't make valuations like that. It's impossible. So the best you can do is explore them artistically, through, and part of me is like, as the series grows, if they were to do DLC, could they do a third ending? And I almost like Phantom Liberty really like sold me on the idea that it's sometimes very possible to add an ending that like monumentally increases the core experience of a game. But this isn't one of those experiences, like I kind of think that this is good. However, there is a lot of like gaps on like the Dysandra family lore. Like, why did the writers start this fire that killed Verso? What is this faction that's causing fires? Like, how
There's
they
questions
use
too on like painters create these worlds. Do writers create worlds too?
I love it.
So I
Yeah.
mean, like
the writer's sequel, right?
yeah,
Alan Wake. Alan Wake is back.
yeah. There's a lot of Remedy stuff, that comes
Yeah.
up with that.
I think that's what I
BabySeal,
most want to
real quick,
see.
I'm really glad that you brought
Yeah.
up the I'm sorry, real quick. I'm really glad you brought up the disability angle.
Yeah.
It reminds me, like I was when I had cancer. I was medically disabled. I won't go into it, but I did have a condition where I was not living in as a normal human being. Actually, not just chemo. Like my entire digestive system was completely different. It's all fixed now, thank goodness, right? I can't believe it.
Yeah.
But for a good half year, I was not living as a normal human life.
Yeah.
And my God, if I had the option to just hop into a painting and just like reform my body and look as young as I want to be and feel as energetic as I want to be, who am I to judge Mael for doing that, right? Or Alicia to do that, right? I would totally do it the same too, 1,000%. I'm glad you brought that up. Thanks.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. Okay, so I think we are out of time, guys. But please, Hayes, Gene, both, if you guys could let all the followers on here from my side know where to find you guys, what they can look forward to in your work. Please let me do that. Hayes, you can start with you.
Yeah, you can find me at Soul Fleet, SOL Fleet on X and Blue Sky. Most of my work over at inverse.com. I don't have any huge things coming up. I put out most of my big stuff recently, but we have a series called Game Changers that I do a lot for, where we interview prominent, influential developers across the industry. I just put one out talking to Hiroyuki Sakamoto, the chief producer at Ryuga Gokuto, who makes Yakuza. So want to read that, head over to inverse.com.
Awesome. And Gene?
Yeah, you can find me on WashingtonPost.com. Just Google Washington Post and Gene Park. By now, I should have my interview up with the Sandfall lead writer, Jennifer, and of course the creative director, Guillaume. And we had a really fun conversation about a lot of the stuff that we just talked about. Not too spoilery, but if you've already gotten this far, then you should have no problem with spoilers and dive in and see what nuggets you can pull, and hopefully it will enrich hopefully my intention for these interviews is that after you read it, you walk away feeling like your appreciation for your own game experience was a little bit more enriched. And I hope that article does that too.
Yeah, no, for
Thanks
sure.
for having me on.
Oh yeah,
thanks for being on.
Thank you guys. We plan on me and BabySeal here plan on doing more terminally online gamers. Anyways, thank you guys so much for joining, and I'll see you guys all next time. Later, people.
Later.